So on to our second topic. So over 60% of Pakistan's foreign remittance come from the Gulf countries, primarily Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Most of the Pakistani workers going to the Gulf go on journal labor visa and are unskilled. Meanwhile, employers in the Gulf have long-standing and tested recruitment channels that are hard for them to give up. And to further debate the topic, we would like to invite the moderator and the panelists on the stage to start the session on employment space for skilled in the Gulf, identifying opportunities and employer needs. May I welcome Dirk, Schmautzer, partner and co-head of Global Education Practice, McKinsey & Company, who will be moderating this panel discussion. And the panelists for this session are Ahmad, Jalal, Chief Executive Officer, Aman Foundation. We have Fatima, Asad Saeed, Director, AbacusConsulting. We have Ahmad Shafiq, Chief Executive Officer, College of Tourism and Hospitality Management. And we have Ahsan Qureshi, Chief HR Officer, Descon Engineering Limited.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this panel discussion. Some of you might remember me, so I keep my comments short in this one. I think this is about employment opportunities in the Gulf. And we heard a lot of the relevant numbers on this before. So I would say between 2010 and 2015, talent export from Pakistan to the Gulf rapidly grew, almost 20% per year, reaching almost 1 million people in 2015. 2016 was not such a good year with a bit of a drop, and then 2017 was actually a real problem with almost a 50% drop in exports. So there's many reasons for this, right? I mean, you have oil prices, you have, and we heard that in some of the panels before, a big push for nationalization in the Gulf countries. There's something about sectors growing in which Pakistan are traditionally not very strong at. So there's challenges, but there's also opportunities for the country. And this is what we want to do with this panel. And maybe I'll start with a very fundamental question on this, Ahmed, to you, which is, there is a bit of an assumption that talent export to other countries is a good thing, right? And clearly there's remittances and there's other effects, but there's also negative effects for the host economy. If you think about benefits and challenges of talent export, how do you think about that and how do you weigh them off?
So thank you, Dirk, for coming over to Pakistan, and thank you for the audience. It's a very important question, and I think one has to zoom out and look at the macro level. We in Pakistan, unfortunately, have a mercantilist view to our economic development, which is we all focus on exports, earning foreign exchange, but we never focus about building the local economy. And the way I see it, skills development, the topic today, is not about training, it's not about charity, it's not about education in the traditional sense, it's about building industries. Because the main input of industry is human capital, trained human capital. And so it's intrinsically linked to building the industry. And so, whilst one hand, the advantage of exporting is that you get the remittances, but we have seen from the earlier comments by the Planning and Development Chairman, is that if you export the wrong kind of, or the less skilled worker, then you don't get the right high level of remittances as you get in Philippines. But also when the economy takes a downturn, these are the first jobs to lose and you get a huge number of people coming back. We run a vocational training institute. We have graduated more than 12,000 people. We have placed about 300 of them abroad. I have a very different view of it. I'm actually not as a keen advocate of foreign export of Pakistani labor. It's a minority view, but I have my view. And the reason is very simple. That kid, that young boy or girl who lives in his family, when he goes abroad, and particularly when he goes abroad for a very hard and menial and not a high-paying job, you're taking away the family support system that he's able to provide when he's based in Pakistan within his community, being able to support his family. So number one, that is what it is. Number two, if you have the best, and the best is not very good, because let us be very authentic with ourselves, the quality of labor in Pakistan, and that's from the top management to all the way down, is not at par with international standards. I would think that you deprive of the local industry of the right building blocks to build it. So I'll give you an example. There's only one industry in Pakistan which is globally competitive. There's only one. It's not a very popular industry, but if you have exports in that industry, Pakistan would be one of the top 5 exporters. And that's nuclear industry. Why is it? Because we do our own R&D. We build everything ourselves. We must have copied it at the beginning, but right from the nuts and bolts all the way to the more complicated things, we build it ourselves. In Pakistan, most industries do not build anything from the scratch all the way up. Hence, we don't have global competitive industries. And building those things require trained and skilled workers, both at the basic level and at the more skilled levels. And we haven't invested in that, and we haven't done that. So I think if we were to build the skills, we should build it for the Pakistani industry. We should build it to build the industrial base of Pakistan that is competitive. And naturally, every 5 years, we have balance of payments crisis because the industry is incompetitive for various reasons, but primarily my experience is, and we worked a lot with industries, because the industry, a lot of it, doesn't invest in the skills development of its workforce. So I think if you take the balance of it, I would still think that we should export, but we should export the right skill level, the higher skill level, and if it's not there, then we should focus on the local skill development.
Talent export, but conscious talent export. And before we continue the discussion, I hear we have actually another participant remotely on the line, that is Majid, the head of human resources development from Majid Al Futtaim. Majid, can you hear us? Hello? Maybe not yet. Maybe I'll let the colleagues in technical sort that out. And while we are doing this, Fatima, question to you. I talked a little bit about the changing environment in the Gulf a bit earlier. So oil prices, industries going up and down, big push for nationalization. Can you elaborate a bit more on this and what the short-term but also the medium-term consequences for Pakistan are going to be?
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. Essentially, when we look at the Gulf states and the Middle Eastern states, we should be very cautious of not clubbing each state together, because each country and each state is on a different roadmap in terms of their economic targets, in terms of what their strategies are, what their vision is, and of course what their need is for employment, in terms of employment, in terms of the talent that they require. So case in point, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and I think Kuwait as well, are focused on a strategy of ensuring that nationalization is taking place and more jobs are being offered to their local population. So just in Saudi Arabia's case, you have Saudiization taking place very aggressively. And obviously that has an impact on the number of expats, and including, which obviously includes the Pakistani workforce, that they will absorb into the economy. So these are some things that we must keep in mind when we look at the landscape of job opportunities in the Gulf states. As compared to markets like the UAE, markets like Qatar, for example, these two markets are very focused on economic diversification, and there's an aggressive strategy, a very focused roadmap over the next 10-15 years in terms of which industries which skill set they require in order to achieve their economic targets, and also they have a smaller, relatively smaller local population. So the need for them to attract expatriate skill set and also experience is much greater. So that is my starting point when you look at the landscape. Sometimes we just have a tendency of clubbing everything together. Once we come to that, we drill down in terms of what these growing economies really require. Yes, right down, there may be a bit of an economic downturn, but that will open up going forward. And what we need to recognize is which sector requires reskilling. We talked about reskilling in the earlier sessions, and some of the speakers also alluded to that. And the reskilling has to be very focused. It's definitely driven by emerging technologies. It is definitely driven by AI, robotics coming into play, the app development space as well. But coupled with that is the specific experience and expertise that individuals require in sectors which are growing in these markets. That's your healthcare, your hospitality, your tourism industry. So are we building a skill set which will complement what these sectors require in these focused economies? So that, and the last point I would like to highlight, which draws our attention to our Pakistani workforce, which is looking for jobs, is they need to be mindful that they are competing on a global platform. They're competing with individuals from all over the world. So not only technical expertise and knowledge, but it's also the social skills that they have, the way, the professionalism, the ethics that they bring to the table, and how are they inventing or reinventing themselves to maintain or highlight that differentiating factor. That is extremely important, and we tend to forget about that because we say, yes, we've attained this particular degree, or this particular certification, and therefore we should get the job. But are you really being positioned or placing or positioning yourself in a way that it puts your CV aside and apart in terms of the differentiating factors of adding value to that particular organization?
Thank you, Fatima. I earlier heard that Majid might now be on the line. Is that true? Majid, can you hear us? Not on the line. I said this earlier about the fourth industrial revolution, right? A lot of potential to automate, but adoption is a bit of a... So we'll wait for this. In the meantime, I think one thing that I'm taking away from this is that whatever the sectors will be that will be competitive going forward in which Pakistan needs to play, one thing that's going to be really important is training providers understanding employer needs and training accordingly. We have two training providers here, we have an employer here. I think that's an interesting discussion. Maybe we start with the training provider perspective. Ahmed, what would you say? What's the level of understanding that training providers have today in terms of what do employers in the Gulf really need, what do they value, and how good are they in terms of producing that?
Can you hear me? I'm representing hospitality and tourism sector, and the Gulf region is traditionally is not known for Pakistanis to be employed in the hospitality and tourism sector there. Mainly we were working with untrained, unskilled people there, laborers, or the construction sector, maybe in the petroleum sector, some part of it. When we talk about hospitality, no doubt it has some different little requirements. Keeping in mind the trainees or the candidates, they have soft skills required by the hotel industry, the hospitality industry. They need to have a smile on their faces, life skills as we call it. Then they need to have some sort of language skills, depending if they know English or they have one of the European language, if they know some Arabic. In the Middle East, what we experience through our small setup in Dubai, we are taking feedback from the hotels, and then we are working with the major brands in the Middle East. if you go to the most of the hotels, you'll find our graduates, pass outs working there. There are very few in our hotels, not, maybe the number is more than 1,000 in overall Gulf, but few in one hotel. The missing part in Pakistan is that we lack the support from the government that to identify the opportunities there. We can work on the quality side. Of course, there are different skill set we required for the hospitality sector. And then one of the main upcoming area is aviation we are working on. We are working since 2 years on aviation because aviation has a more growth even than other sectors in the Middle East. And we are working on that. We need people for the ground operations. We need people for the customer service and for the cabin crew. So in hospitality, aviation, travel and tourism, and retail, the skill set is a little different than the construction side. We, in our institutions, we try to do our part, but what we are looking for, we need a support from PSDF and the government to come and bridge the gap, to identify the main employers, because we are hitting the individual hotels and we are trying to fulfill the requirements. But we are not taking the lead. What we need to bridge the gap through PSDF or the labor attaches or our government, at the senior levels, to come up and connect us with the groups, with the major groups in the Middle East, major hotel groups in the Middle East, major travel and tourism groups in the Middle East. And I believe the Pakistani talent, the Pakistani youth, and the schools, we can deliver that, we can give that component, we can give that skill set required in the field there.
Ahmad, before I give it to the other Ahmed, let me ask one follow-up question to my original question. So if we look at tourism and hospitality as one of the kind of future growth sectors, as you laid out, and you would try to measure the performance of the Pakistani training in that sector today in terms of understanding what employers want and executing against this. On a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being we don't know what they want, for sure we're not producing it, 10 being look, we know better what they want than they do it, and we have the right people. Where's Pakistan today on that scale, roughly?
I think 1 to 10 we are 6.
Is 6. Ahmed, what's your view?
Again, I'll say, I think the way the skills development sector is looked upon is incorrect. I think it has to be completely seen from the reference of industry alignment and demand generation. It is not the objective of a training institute to generate the demand. The objective and the purpose has to come from the industry. And that's my point that I was talking earlier. And this is something that we do as Aman Tech. Every 2 years, we do something called an industry alignment exercise. We look at our trades, we look what we teach, and then we invite floor supervisors, floor managers of mechanical, electrical, and then we ask them to review and ask them, okay, what is it that what we are doing is correct, and what is it that you need or you don't need to do it. We pay for it ourselves because we want our kids to be placed. This needs to happen at the industry level or the industry association level. There are huge industry associations, whether it's the Textiles Association, Auto Industry Association. They will do a lot of lobbying for taxes, but they'll never get together to create a skills council to determine what are the skills they need at basic entry level. It is anywhere and everywhere in the world, whether it's the South Korean model or the German model or the Japanese model, it is the industry that determines what it needs, and then the training industry aligns to deliver that. It's not done by the government, frankly. The government can facilitate. And I think if you wait for the government, it will be too late. Basically the industry and the Vocational Training Institute have to collaborate. Industry academia collaboration has to happen for it, and that hasn't. That's why industry hasn't scaled. I'll reference my one earlier comment. I said Pakistan has a lack of talent from the top to the bottom. I absolutely stand by my statement, but there is a nuance to it, which is we do not have enough talent to scale businesses. So we have excellence of talent at individual level, at across the board, But try scaling a business, try getting 100 mid-level managers, or 15 top managers, or 1,000 workers, and you'll really struggle to find the right quality of workers. So that hasn't happened, and that hasn't happened because both the industry hasn't invested in it, and it's the industry's prerogative, and the collaboration hasn't happened.
If I ask the same follow-up question to you, and that may well be to industry not organizing also, but if you look at the understanding of employer needs and the quality of talent produced in your field of training, how would you rate it on the 1 to 10 scale?
I think the 4 probably. I'd actually think that's much less.
We have a 5 on average. Would be very good to hear the employer perspective now, Ahsan. I mean, you hire people. Would be good to understand if you look at the training landscape. Are these the right skills? Are these the skills that are being needed? What is your view on the talent that is being produced? What's your view on the earlier point on kind of industry coming together and actually defining skill sets?
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think there are a couple of factors we need to build on. As Fatima said earlier on, there are few points where we need to build on. The most important aspect in Middle Eastern market from an employer's perspective is to some extent, they don't really care where their workforce is coming from, as long as they get the quality delivered. Now, our vocational institute or even universities are producing graduates and all that. We need to have a mindset shift towards the GCC countries or the way we approach the roles and the jobs. I was reading an interesting, right over there, it said 60% of drivers in UAE are Pakistanis. It was the case, and it probably still is the case, but is this something we are proud of? Or is this something we are going to be focusing on? My colleague here mentioned aviation. The organization I was associated for 8 years in Abu Dhabi was one of the biggest sovereign wealth funds. And I've never seen a visit by Pakistani embassy or the attaches. We were working very closely with a lot of other countries, importing their skills and so forth. But we didn't receive that kind of support and the skill set. Now, the skill set which are being already produced, we do produce, to counter your point earlier on, we do produce pretty good quality, skilled and managerial capable individuals who are in very senior positions in GCC countries. Where we need to focus is on educating whether they are skilled or unskilled or semi-skilled in their understanding of cultural sensitivities. How when they go in, are they trained and equipped to represent themselves, because they're not only representing themselves, they're representing their country and they're representing a brand. I also believe that we do not also do a good job in marketing ourselves or having a proper media campaign or communication campaigns around what we actually can offer. We used to do a lot of those things in early 80s, and we have, if you look back the history of specifically UAE's economic development, we were in the forefronts in banking industry and all those sectors. Look at Emirates. Emirates was established by our workforce or our skilled and professionals. So we have missed that. We've missed that boat. I mean, where we need also we need to be cautious from the fact that whatever 60 or 70% of our remittances are coming from GCC. It might not be the same in the future. It's a very shaky political situation there. So we also need to be aware of and diversify our workforce where it does not hurt our economic interests and diversification. Just one last point, what Fatima mentioned, that organizations in Middle East have very focused localization objectives, whether it's Saudiization or Emiratization. I was part of one of their projects in UAE, where by 2030 we had 50% Emiratization in some of our aviation-based manufacturing sites. We did that, we had 60% amortization in one of our floors, factory floors, which is producing plane parts for Airbus and Boeing. But what I'm saying that they are focused on supporting their local skills. Unfortunately, we are not. And that's where I think what I learned from my experience in Middle East is the amount and the seriousness of the leadership in the country, the business community in the country on their local development. And that goes back to what my friend earlier said. We have enough development projects of our own within Pakistan to focus on, let alone be exporting those. And if we do that, focus on 20% export of skill or managerial capability that bring us 80% inflows rather than 80% and getting only 20% in return.
2 follow-up questions to you.
Oh, so I confused you more.
One is a number, right? So we have the 5. Well, what's your assessment on the quality of the output and understanding employer needs? It's between 5 or 7. It's what the trainer side says.
I would be safe, like for skilled or unskilled.
Yeah.
Skilled is at probably around 4-ish.
Yeah.
But at the managerial level, I would say around 7 to 8.
Okay.
Because that's what I've experienced.
Interesting. And then the follow-up question, if there was one thing you could tell your training provider colleagues to change, would that be what? Is that more cross-cutting skills? Is that different sectors? What's the one thing you would want to change in the training landscape to go to an 8 or 9?
I think cultural sensitivities and understanding the market dynamics. The market dynamics of Middle East are not the same what they were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now the organization I'm representing now, today, is one of the things which we are getting hurt is the localization aspect. Now the organizations or the government in Middle East and Saudi and UAE and Saudi, they actually want not only Emiratize or Saudiize the workforce, they want you to buy and procure from their manufacturers in those countries, which is not an LCC, which is not a low-cost center. Middle East is a high-cost producer. So we need to be very cautious of the dynamics of overall economics that are taking place or they're shaping the Middle Eastern markets.
Different question. There's this big debate around qualifications. So Saudi went through a big effort to put a new national qualifications framework in place locally. And some are saying, look, this is not what we need to train for, right? If you export people there, we need to understand these qualifications and train for them. There's others that say, you know what Saudi employers want and what the qualification framework says are 2 different things. Let's go for international qualifications. And then there's still others that say, look, none of this really matters, right? It's all about skills and forget all of these qualifications. Would again be good to hear from the training provider perspective. What's your view? What are you training for? What's the importance of skills framework, international degrees, something completely different? What's the future in terms of degrees and qualifications?
Thank you. I believe certifications, qualifications are very important. And when you talk about international awarding bodies, they do have a minimum standards. Unfortunately, in the system we live here in Pakistan, our TEVTAs and our other awarding bodies, they did not build reputation for their qualifications, for their certifications. They did not own it at all. They always try to have international certifications in the system, so they couldn't build their own systems. They even couldn't build to have a certificate for a plumber, or a carpenter, or a waiter, or a cook, because they don't own that. They didn't focus on that. Even we tried our best to request them to work on our own qualifications, to at least when you send your people to the Middle East, they can carry your own certificate, or Pakistani certificate, Pakistani awarding body, so you can build a reputation. But they couldn't. Unfortunately, when we started our school, because we are in the hospitality and tourism sector and aviation sector, we had to rely on international certifications. You talk about hospitality, we have the best awarding bodies for Pakistan, from US, from UK, from Europe. You talk about aviation, we have IATA on board. There is nothing there because they run 86, 87% of the aviation of the world. So they say there is a survey in the Middle East, a recent survey, 2018, that 76% of the HR heads of the airline companies are looking for certified, internationally certified people. So it means there is a value for the certification, there is a value for the degree at the moment. And what I believe is we need to have a little flexibility from our funding agencies, let's say PSDF. They need to give some flexibility to the high performers, their TSPs, this called training service providers, to give them some flexibility out of this, that outdated mechanism and outdated syllabus they are following. Because we have to follow that TEFTA outlines, they are outdated. They are not up at par with the required skill sets of the Middle Eastern market. We don't have to only compete with the Filipinos or Sri Lankans and Indians. In hospitality and aviation, we have to compete with Europeans. I think is missing link here. We have to compete with the European hotel schools. We are member with 150 European hotel schools group. And we see them in Middle Eastern hotels. We see they are sending their kids for placements and employment. And so we have a competition with the Europeans. We need to have at least one European language. It can be French or German, if not Arabic. We need English and French or German. So we need some liberty, some support from our part, from Pakistan. And I believe the international certifications we are following until we don't have our own certifications. We need to follow that, and we can have our share from the Gulf market. There is our share, I believe, and we can gain that with the support of our partners in Pakistan. Yes, government and the funding agencies.
So are you saying it would be good to build a local qualification framework? However, in the end, it counts what employers want, and employers are looking for international qualifications.
I say you need to have international certifications because you are not competing only with Filipinos, forget it.
Right.
You are competing with Europeans when you talk about hotels. What we talk hotels, you're talking about Marriott, you're talking about Intercons, Rutanas, Holiday Inns, Sheratons. They have a very minimum number of Filipinos or Indians.
Very clear.
The majority of the number is the Europeans in their,
Ahmad, what's your view?
So my view is that the mapping of the skills in the GCC with the availability of talent over here is not done. What I know on authoritative account that McKinsey has done a skills mapping of some sort here in Punjab. I've asked for it from Salman, but I haven't gotten it. But I think what happens is in countries like Singapore and other countries, they do, as a government, as an entity or as a sector, they do skills mapping for both local as well as where the global trends are going. And they try to match, and once they do that, the training industry then aligns with the skills trend that's going to happen. And because that doesn't happen at a structured manner, at an organized manner, so each institution does it separately on its own, and they don't do a very good job of it. So there's a big mismatch in terms of both identification of the right skills and over here. The other thing is that there is no long-term planning of it. Because most of the jobs that come in the market, most of the demand that comes to us is about filling a role. There is no long-term planning, development, engagement with the industry, both in the GCC and over here, to map out what is their need in 6 months or 1 year's time, and to be able to supply to those needs. So I think those are the two main areas. That's why there's a gap.
Do we have Majid on the line by now, or still not working? Not working? Okay. Ahsan, then to you from the employer perspective, what is it that you are looking for in terms of qualifications?
I think I'll go back to what I said earlier. Like from an employer's perspective, I need quality resource, and it doesn't matter where I get it, but as long as they are equipped with the right skill set, whether it's through certification or through degrees or whatnot, then I would hire them. We have a very capable talent pool in Pakistan, and my organization is one of the very few which which are known to export very quality-based engineers globally, and in Middle East. And we compete with companies like Shell or ExxonMobil or GEs for that matter. And our standards and the qualities are no less than any well-established benchmarks. In some areas, I would say even, we are better off in some aspects. But we need quality. One aspect which I would definitely like to point out here is sometimes when we send people from or any training institution or whatnot is to some extent I agree that we don't do a good job in equipping them, training them to meet the needs of an employer overseas. We just pack in X number of people in a bag and ship them off without thinking of long-term output, long-term strategy, how it's going to hurt us. Because when we send, it's like a product. When we send a low-quality product to our end user or to our customer, it's going to fire back. And our percentage or our market share is going to decrease. So we have to be very, very cautious and careful in terms of what we produce, how we produce, and align them. Have a discussion with the stakeholder. Go and talk to the employers and what do you need? What do you need so I can produce those to address your needs? And it's a win-win situation for them.
Yeah. This is a panel with a very strict time management and a conference with a very strict time management. So one question left for the panel, then we give it over to the audience. Fatima, that one goes to you. We heard a lot that this is about more than just the training machine, right? There's something that the government can do, right? We heard about government-to-government relations. I heard now kind of 3 times the story of Pakistani labor minister never comes and the others always come, so what can we do there? There was this other point around marketing, right? Can we have a broad marketing campaign even of the quality of Pakistani labor and the sectors? So what is it that can improve in that regard?
Okay, so it's all a question of supply and demand and having a framework that is aligned towards what do you want to achieve. I'll come to the marketing aspect, but it starts with what is the focus in terms of you're developing these skills, and I'm talking about semi-skilled and that category. I'm not talking about management, which I feel that we have some incredible talent when it comes to leadership. Even in this room, there are amazing individuals who have gone abroad and now they've come back to Pakistan and they've done exceptionally well from a leadership perspective. But from a skill perspective, one of the first things that strike me as an employer in Pakistan, in the Middle East as well, is unfortunately the unskilled / semi-skilled category do not enjoy the dignity and the respect that comes with that job. You go into developing countries, being a plumber or being an electrician or being a similar category, there is a certain, not only a monetary value attached to it, but a certain dignity, which is unfortunately missing in our country. So perhaps collectively, from a training perspective, we need to focus on that. Coming to your marketing perspective.
How do we do that?
Sorry?
How do we do that?
How would we do?
Dignity, great.
Dignity. Well, it's about making sure that when we are training them in the institutes, the framework that we develop, it's an integrated approach. So one aspect is the actual skill that is being developed. The other aspect is the social skills and creating an awareness to the consumer who is using, the end consumer who is using their skill set. So even, and it starts from the home, quite frankly. This kind of respect for the other person who's doing you a service starts from the home. So it's a value system that you have. Secondly, it has to be reflected by the ethical standards of the individual who is giving you that service. And just like we groom individuals in educational institutions, we should have that kind of focus given in our technical institutes as well. The second part of your question is marketing as a country. Unfortunately, and maybe this is just my perspective, we don't have any PR strategy, or we've had a very weak PR strategy as a nation over the last many years. One is hopeful and positive that with the new government there's already a lot of work underway to develop a framework and a strategy which will provide a positive image to Pakistan, which also talks about the foreign affairs, the diplomacy interactions that we have with the other governments as well, and also make sure that there is a dignity for the Pakistanis that are going out into the world. But I would agree with some of my panelists, it starts from home. We have 200 million people, 60% under the age of 30. They have to be absorbed in our workforce. They have to build products and services for the other consumers, some of them themselves, and to the other consumers all over. There is diversity, cultural diversity, ethnic diversity, religious diversity in this country. And then you have to put that together in order to grow as an economy. If we correct our thought process and mindset at home, then collectively as a nation, we go out to other countries and we are proud to be Pakistanis. I mean, I can share experiences where we hire in the Middle East, whether it's our Saudi offices or the UAE offices, etc. Incredible talent we come across. If we're looking, we're looking for technology space related individuals and experience, from leadership to the, I'm sorry, I'm just wrapping up. I know you're on I saw the clock. But unfortunately we struggle because nationality becomes a minus point for us. And we have to induct Indians and other nationalities in order to even have confidence with the clients that we work with, which is a very unfortunate, but I feel it's changing because there is a positive image, and I have a great hope on the next generation, which is, one, they don't have emotional baggage because they don't relate to what happened 15 years ago or 18 years ago. The millennials have this drive to really create value, and that is where we want to leverage on. They will be our brand in the future.
Very clear, thank you. We still take one question from the audience, if this alert lets me. Over there, please. Please, have a mic. And maybe also say to which panelist you would like to pose the question.
Okay, I'll just like to pass on a general observation from these, after listening to all the learned panel members. I'm from University of Management and Technology, and we have a forum called Innovation Champions. We call it Innovation Capital Development Forum. It's a think tank. We have focus group sessions, and we come up with solutions to all the problems which we are facing. Okay, coming straight to my observation, anyone can comment on it. The observation is very simple, you know. We are still in a mindset of survival. We are still looking at exporting the basic raw material in terms of labor or whatever, man hours. And we are looking at the market, which is a dying market. Middle East is not what it used to be 5-10 years back, and it will not be the same as the time progresses. The majority of remittances are coming from the taxi drivers and the lower, class working there. Now we have disruptive technologies, and probably the taxi drivers' demand will go down, things will go down. So we need to look to recreate our thought lines probably. Okay, the other...
What's the question?
The question is that, I said, I'm just passing an observation, right? And I'd like to have comments on it from anybody. Okay, what we have seen is that, you know, with the new emergence of technology, the wealth starts getting concentrated in few hands. And we have seen it happening during last 3 revolutions. The 4th one is coming, probably the hands will change, and probably the 50% global wealth will be 50 or 100 people, and maybe around that. So, and we are trying to develop workforce to serve those guys and to, you know, come to terms with their requirements so that we can export or sell them our man hours. What my take on this thing is that instead of looking at exporting the man hour, instead of exporting the man hours, whether we export it in physical form or virtual form, we should be looking at creating big products here make them work here. Instead of exporting man hours in terms of physical or virtual, we should be exporting products. And once we have that innovation factory or a product, then the skill set which is required to serve that will start getting developed locally. Our attitudes will improve, our working conditions will improve, our skill set will improve, and as a nation we'll be able to compete rather than looking at exporting low yielding manpower overseas. Thank you. So this is the observation, and if anybody wants to comment on that.
Thank you for the observation. We need to close, so we have one more question. We run out of time. Thank you all very much. Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, audience.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Jalal will come and give out a small token of gratitude from our side. We'd also like all of you to please take a group photo. And we would especially like to extend our gratitude to Mr. Dirk here, who have specially flown from Dubai to participate in this conference. Thank you so much, Dirk, for your participation. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.